There has been a lot of different Nintendo Switch news going around, whether that's the release of the reformed Switch and of course the upcoming Switch Lite. But something else that has just come up is now the potential of Nintendo releasing a wireless Super Nintendo controller for the Switch. This discovery was made by a user on Reset Era who found FCC filings for a Nintendo Switch controller that is styled like an SNES controller, the big giveaway being a picture of the back of the controller showing a designation for a model number HAC, which is normally used for Switch-related products. Now this news in and of itself is pretty cool. It's awesome that we have SNES-themed stuff, but what people are more excited about is what this actually implies Nintendo is finally going to do soon for the Switch. Because last time they did something like this was to make these NES-style Joy-Cons, which were meant to be used exclusively with NES games on the Switch. So, if we're getting a Super Nintendo version, we might finally be seeing Super Nintendo games make their way to the Switch. The timing of this makes a lot of sense, because this is a big question that's been going on over the last year, where people are saying, hey, there's NES games on the Switch, are we going to see SNES games? When are we going to see SNES games? What SNES games will actually show up? And there was even a supposed list of games that were supposed to be SNES titles coming to the Switch that was leaked quite a while ago, and then promptly disappeared once people started talking about it. And whenever people have asked questions of, are we going to see news about this? In fact, it was a heavy question during E3 time, I've always had the same thought and response of, if there is any actual hard news that this is happening, it's not going to happen until the end of August or sometime in September. The reason this is important is because Nintendo Switch Online memberships last for 1 year, so everyone who signed up for a membership last year when it first opened up is about now asking themselves the question of, do I need to actually re-up this for an entire year? Because if you're not making use of the online memberships, and if you're not caring about the NES games they've released so far, you need a new reason to want to have to re-sign up for a whole nother year. And adding a whole new console, especially one as popular as the SNES, is certainly a strong argument for it. In the past, when we've seen leaks like this and prototypes and just kind of rough sketches, I've always been on the side of caution. You know, hey, this is something they might be working on, but I don't really know for sure if that's going to happen when people are saying. This is one of those situations where, no, I have always believed that it was this time of year that we are going to get SNES games, and this just further cements it in my mind that this is actually happening. So the question is, if it is happening in September, how exactly is Nintendo going to handle it? When Nintendo Switch Online originally released, it had a list of 20 NES games available to play. Now what's interesting about this list is that it does not line up perfectly with the 20 games that Nintendo put on the NES Classic. And when you look at that original launch list of 20 games, it's kind of a mixed bag of some amazing, awesome games that are pretty predictably available, and then a few other kind of alright ones mixed in. And ever since after that list of 20 games, we've been getting about 2 to 3 titles released every month. Now, for the Super Nintendo Classic, the question is, are they going to handle it that same way, or are they going to treat it a little differently? Because they could take the approach of, yes, this is a new library of games, but we're still just adding on to that same overall list of stuff people can access on their Switch. So instead of being a large list of 20 games right away, it could just be, well, here's 4 or 5 Super Nintendo games this month, next month we'll do another list, and over time dwindle that down to maybe 2 or 3 titles. Or they could celebrate its launch by going with a big list right away of 20 or so titles. Now, the leak that happened back in January of this year, there were 22 games on that list, and I'm not going to try and do that from memory. So, those 20 games in question were Super Mario Kart, Super Soccer, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, Demon's Crest, Yoshi's Island, Stunt Race FX, Kirby's Dream Course, Poppin' Twin Bee, Star Fox, Contra 3, Kirby Superstar, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, Kirby's Dream Land 3, Super Metroid, Super Mario World, Pilot Wings, F-Zero, Star Fox 2, Super Punch-Out, Legend of Mystical Ninja, Super Mario All-Stars, and Breath of Fire 2. And in total, that's a list of 22 games, which pretty nicely matches up with the NES launch library of 20. But what makes me a little hesitant to believe that this is going to be the same list they use for the actual launch is, first off, it's very old news. This is back in January versus right now, we're now in August. And 2, the inclusion of Breath of Fire 2. By the way, if you want a cool and easy way to customize your regular Joy-Cons, check out skins like these from today's sponsor, D-Brand. They got a bunch of different designs and are totally safe to use. Check out the link down below to learn more. If you look at the list of NES games currently on the Switch, the vast majority of them are first-party Nintendo. There is some third-party stuff involved, but it's a lot of smaller companies versus things like Capcom or Squaresoft. You're not seeing the original Final Fantasy or old-school Mega Man, for instance. So the inclusion of Breath of Fire 2 on the SNES list is a little weird, because that is a Capcom title. So if we were going to get a Capcom game on this list, why aren't we seeing some of the other potential third-party things? Because look, I love Breath of Fire 2, but there's a lot of other major Capcom titles that would make a lot more sense, like Mega Man X, for instance. That title aside though, pretty much everything else on that list makes a lot of sense, not just because a lot of them are first-party Nintendo titles, but a lot of them are the same franchises that eventually made their way to the NES library. So that still gives some pretty good possibility that this list from back in January could still be the real deal. And if it is, that is super exciting, because it not only means that we have a great initial list of Super Nintendo games to play, but it opens the door that, hey, if Capcom's on this list, we might see more big third-party titles from the SNES make their way to the Switch. I, for one, would love to see some Square Enix stuff show up, because look, Chrono Trigger is my favorite game. The last time we got a chance to play it again was on the 3DS. Let's bring it back a fourth time. That'd be awesome. Another big question this raises to me is, what is Nintendo's long-term plan for this? Because if they started with Nintendo games when Nintendo Switch Online launched, and a full year later they're adding Super Nintendo games, is there a plan to add something a year later from now? And if so, what is it? Because the kind of natural progression I think a lot of people would assume is N64, which is a wild-looking idea, by the way, when you picture a pair of N64 controllers slid onto the side of a Switch. But that isn't the only way they could go with it. I mean, something that I've talked about before in regards to whether or not they were going to work on more classic systems is that while, yeah, N64 is the next standard console, there's always the idea of taking that sidestep and focusing on Game Boy, whether that is just original Game Boy stuff or going from Game Boy to Game Boy Color. After all, there are a lot of amazing games on the Game Boy that have strong fan bases. You just have to look at the fact that we're actually seeing a remake of Link's Awakening coming out later this year. Of course, having a specialized controller designed to look like a Game Boy is a little weirder, but they could, after all, just stick to having regular Joy-Cons and release them in the style of Game Boy Colors, which I am all for. And on that same note, going back to Super Nintendo, with the Switch Lite coming out so close to the same time that Super Nintendo games should be making their way to the Switch, I can't help but really, really hope that along with the Pokemon Special Edition system, we actually get a Super Nintendo Switch Lite. After all, they did it for the 3DS, Nintendo, make it happen.